I like, click, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. It's Netflix time. This movie's called The Time Traveler's Wife. Due to a genetic disorder, handsome librarian Henry involuntarily zips through time, appearing at various moments in the life of his true love. It's a sci-fi movie that came out back in 2009. It's an hour and 47 minutes long. Spoiler alert, let's get it. So we got this boy by the name of Henry just chilling in the car, and he's singing songs with his mom on a snowy winter, and they pass by this grocery named Zipman's. Apparently it's Christmas because they got the Santa Claus out there. Notice how it look kind of old, right? Well, anyway, mom's car swerves out of control, and she ends up hitting his oncoming truck. And then for some reason, Henry starts disappearing, like what the fuck? Then he appears at his house watching himself and his mom read a bedtime story. And his dad joins him. So right off the bat, you're thinking to yourself, the time travel hits early in this movie, but how's it all happening? Then he disappears again, and then we go right back to the incident, where you see the car get obliterated by this truck. His mom is done deal dead. And then out of nowhere, Henry meets his older self. It's like, what? Okay, number one, how was he time traveling as a kid? Two, if that's his older self, how the hell did Henry as a young'un escape the damn car? Unless he was never in the car to begin with. Or he was able to time travel even as a kid. So Henry explains to his younger self all of this, and then his older self just disappears. Next thing you know, we see his older self back in the library naked. Oh yeah, with the whole time traveling thing, he's not able to take his clothes back with him. So he's always looking for a spare change of clothes every time he travels. He puts his clothes back on and checks out books. So wait a minute, nobody saw him? Like there's clearly people in the library at this point. Man, it's just crazy. He goes to this little coffee spot to get some breakfast. He pours some whiskey in his coffee. Probably needs that to deal with his life. And it's around Christmas time. So The Time Traveler's Wife is officially a Christmas movie. Next day, this lady named Claire comes to the library, and she turns around to see Henry, and she knows exactly who he is. But he has no idea who she is at this point. And she's like, I know you don't know me, but your future self told me to be here. She wants to meet him at the coffee shop later on. And she says she'll tell him everything there, and he obliges. As he's getting ready for his date, he gets nervous and he suddenly disappears again. Next thing you know, he's naked. You know what that means? Time travel. He ends up in the back part of a store, which he sneaks into to get some clothes. But before he left them, the police caught him because he was supposed to be an intruder. But there was no point in arresting him because after that, he just disappeared in the back of the cop car. And Henry finally meets up with Claire for his date. She starts telling him everything she knows about the time travel stuff. Now, telling this to a normal person, the average person would have walked away from him. But because he knows who he is, he's not dismissive. She tells him about their future, how they got married. She starts telling him everything she knows about him. They go back to his apartment, and then they get to kissing, and she ends up giving him the business. Then we get to the scene in the meadows where Claire was a young girl. She was setting up for a picnic, and she kept hearing this guy in the bushes ask for a blanket. So she finally tossed him the blanket, and it's the older version of Henry. He tells her about time travel and how he can't take his clothes when he does it. Big reason he asks for the blanket. And for some reason, she just goes along with it. She really gets it now when she sees him disappear. She's not even surprised by it, she just smiles. And then we get back to real time. Like I said, he gave her the business. She gets up and checks his file cabinet. He's like, relax, that's my mom's lipstick. But she's not even tripping off it because she only known him at two ages, when he was young and when he was like really old. She never knew him in his 20s going on his 30s. So let's talk about this whole time travel thing because this is all confusing to me. So he can't really control his time travel, and we don't really know exactly what triggers it, other than when he gets anxious or nervous. But he had to been excited when he was making love to her, and he was still there when he woke up, so it's never really explained, but he seems to be doing it at free will. So she takes him to meet her brother Mark and her girlfriend, and they don't know anything about his traveling. Now apparently Claire had a diary, and in her diary she wrote down the dates and times of every time that Henry went to come visit her. While everybody else is cooking, Henry ends up going through her diary. He goes through it, she catches him, and she's like, why are you reading through my diary? But it's more so for him to figure out a way to stop time traveling, so he can figure out how he keeps ending up in the meadow and all these other places. But she forgives him anyway, because the last thing she wants him to do is leave. I mean, she's pretty much been waiting on him all her life. In the middle of a conversation, he ends up teleporting again and having a fight with some street gang, and he's wearing like girl clothes. And for some reason, he's in an area where Mark catches him and stops him. Mark's like, what are you doing here? What's with that outfit? And he's like, this is the closest thing I can find. So they go to this room where Henry tells him the story about time traveling. Mark obviously thinks it's bullshit. Then he disappears right in front of his face. Mark is like, oh shit. So now Mark knows. He goes to visit his sister Claire. He tells her everything he learned about Henry about time travel. And she's like, yeah, I already know. And then Mark's like, really? Well, you know, this guy might not be the best guy for you. But she don't give a fuck about all that. Henry's a man, and that's it. And Henry had time traveled once again to get on the subway. And he meets up with his mom on the subway. It's like, oh shit. Talks to her about her singing voice being awesome and all this other stuff. And she's got that look on her face like she knows who he is. He tells her son loves her very much, who is obviously him. And this is like the one time he got to go back to the past to see his mom. My thing is, if he can't control where he's going, how can he go back to these exact moments in time? Then next he goes to visit his dad, who pretty much has been drinking, grieving over the death of his wife. He knows all about his son's time travel, and Henry tells his dad that he wants to marry Claire, and he hopes to see him at the wedding. He's like, man, you're gonna torture that girl. Why would you want to bring her into this life that you have? Next he comes back home to find Claire sleeping, and while she's asleep, Henry slipped a ring on her finger, and she wakes up, looks at the ring like, really? He gives this speech and then flat out asks, will he marry him? At first she says no just to see the reaction on his face, but she's just fucking with him. Of course she'll marry him. Then Henry meets Claire's father, who happens to be a Republican and also a hunter. Why is him being a hunter important? I'll explain that later on. Anyway, they get along well. Later on he gets himself a haircut. They like Tom Cruise right here. Anyway, he gets his hair shorted down. When it comes time for the wedding, his dad actually shows up. On the day of the wedding, Henry's got to take a Valium. Mark watches him and then all of a sudden he disappears again. Oh shit. So it's getting to the point where they're kind of waiting on the groom now. When he comes back out to marry her, it's the older version of himself. I'm guessing he did that because when they first met, he was the older version of himself. I don't know. Well, anyway, at the reception, he turns back into the younger version of himself. Like nobody be able to notice, but then again, what phenomenon would they be able to come up with anyway? They could just say he dyed his hair or something. I don't know. I just thought this was funny, but on a song where they're dancing at a wedding, they're singing a song talking about love will tear us apart. I'm like, really? Well, anyway, they get to their room to consummate the marriage. They're jumping around in the bed, and as he's about to jump on her, he disappears again. Like I said, I don't really know if it's exactly his anxiety that makes him time travel, but it ends up happening anyway. She puts on his ring and just waits for him. Throughout this time, he ends up traveling back to the meadows again, seeing Claire again, who leaves out a pair of clothes for him. Even though they tried to explain it, it's still a mystery how she knows exactly when he's going to show up. Now, one rule they do go by when it comes to time travel, Henry tells Claire he's married, but he doesn't say to who. Now, obviously, you don't want to say anything to fuck up the future, right? Now, she's thinking to herself, you should be married to me. Yeah, little do you know, Claire. Yeah, I know it's time traveling, but seeing an older version of Henry and a very much younger version of Claire kind of gives me the creeps. But then again, how old was he really when Claire was that young? They don't really expound on that. So anyway, when he gets back, he tells Claire he was with her younger self. Then afterwards, we see the struggle through their married life. Because, you know, they be chilling with each other. And out the blue, he just disappears. But this time, he was just carrying dishes to the table. So it was like, there's no anxiety there. So it feels like it happens at complete random at this point. And even at one point, he ended up missing Christmas and New Year's. So at one point in time, we thought these time travel things were like a flash in the pan thing, you know, like a day or two. But in this particular time, he couldn't get back like that, and he was gone for about 2 weeks. This is where you can feel a little bit of tension. She's ready to go to work. She ain't got time to talk to him. And she's talking about she has so much work and the place being too small, she can't work there no more. She needs a bigger area. She's tired of an apartment. So, you know, you probably need a house. So later on, after she gets off work, she meets up with Henry on the bench, and he's like, I got an idea. And we all thought to ourselves, he could have been did this shit, right? So he goes to a spot where they sell all these TVs. But she's mostly concerned something will trigger him and he'll mess around and time travel again. The thing is, we're not in here for the TVs. He gives her a lottery ticket. He starts telling her the numbers before they pop up, and she's like, oh shit. That's right. Her ticket, it was the winning $5 million lottery ticket. She's like, isn't this considered cheating? He's like, fuck that. I just want you to have everything you want and to be happy. He says, I could rip up the ticket if you're feeling self-conscious about it. She's like, no, I ain't stupid. Give me that damn ticket. They find themselves the perfect house. They fix it up. Everything's all good and gravy. Then Henry hears somebody coughing in the house. He goes to check it out, and he sees himself with a gun wound. It's like, oh shit. And then afterwards, he just vanished. So they're trying to figure out when is he supposed to die, and he doesn't know. And this is when we realize he could travel through time, but he can't travel to the future, anything past his life. Then they go see this doctor by the name of Kimmer, who Claire used to talk about when she was a child. He tells the doctor everything about it, but obviously he ain't gonna believe this shit. So while she's eating, we found out that she's pregnant. But then she starts having stomach pains. She checks down and she feels blood. Oh no. He goes and checks on her in the hospital, but unfortunately, she had a miscarriage. He goes back to Mr. Kimmer again and explains the story. And he came up with the thesis that because he seems to time travel, he thought the baby might have time traveled too, and that's what happened and how she had a miscarriage. But once again, the doctor's not falling for any of this shit, so Henry's like, look, just do a CAT scan on me or whatever. But he puts him under the scan, and Henry's getting nervous again. And the doctor finally saw for himself that Henry was not playing. He's like, oh shit. So he's saying the reason might be for his traveling is probably because of his anxiety, maybe taking certain types of pills. I'm not really sure. But like I said, he knows he's not even really certain about this. As far as for them trying to have a baby, the doctor recommends that they don't. If the baby does have Henry's cells, then it's probably time traveling too. And if it has the ability to do that, obviously a fetus cannot live outside the world. A couple months later, they had tried again, and she ended up bleeding in the bed again. So Henry's like, why don't we try adopting? But she's dead set on having his kids. Then they pass by Zippies, which, you know, back in the day used to be the Zippermans. Not really relevant to the story, but I just thought it was a fun fact. So since Henry thinking it's impossible to have a kid because of the situation, he goes to this doctor, or to his clinic. And without her consent, he goes by himself and has a vasectomy. I know he's trying to save her in the process, but she's going to be pissed the fuck off. Then somewhere in between there, he time travels again, and we see her in the meadows a little bit more grown. And this was like one of the first times he kissed her. He wants to tell about everything that happened, but he can't because he knows that'll fuck up the future, obviously. But she kissed him back in hopes that he would tell her something. And then back in real time, he comes back to the house. Claire's crafting and putting up paintings and stuff like that. And then he tells her about the procedure he had. Yes, he told her about the vasectomy. He gave his reason about his child not wanting his child to have the same disorder that he has, But obviously, she is pissed the fuck off at this news. And it's really starting to get to her now about having a husband and wanting this life about a guy that just keeps disappearing all the time. Completely frustrated, they're not even sleeping in the same room. I don't know if she gets a premonition or a warning, but she leaves out the house and goes to a parking lot where she finds Henry's younger self. She ends up giving him the business. Why? But she said, fuck that, I'm having a kid by you. Now, technically, it's not cheating because it's with the younger version of himself, so... yeah. That's how she's going to describe it anyway. So she's been acting different around him for like a week. And then she tells him what she did last night. She's like, look, I'm going to have a baby. Fuck that. She tells her it's going to work. We're just going to have a stress-free environment. And this time, so far, the baby's coming along just fine. So while he's in the bathroom coming up with names, he ends up disappearing again. And ends up at the zoo. He gets out the cage, finds some clothes. And then this little girl calls out to him saying, Daddy. Exactly. What the fuck? He's traveled into the future. That's his baby girl named Alba. She's 5 years old. My mind is fucking blown right now. What in all the fuck? So the thing is, she's actually 10 right here. The thing is, it's just her and Claire. Because Henry dies on her 5th birthday. The crazy thing is, he's able to see her, and that means Claire was able to have a child. So when he returns, he sits by Claire, tells her to name her kid Alba. And she's like, oh shit, you saw our daughter? Yeah, this whole thing is insane. Later on, they're finally able to have a baby girl. They give a montage of her being with family, and then her 5th birthday's coming up. So they're looking outside, and Claire's like, who's Alba talking to? And Henry's like, she's talking to her older self. Yeah, that shit is baffling, mind-blowing. But when Dad asks what she talked about, she's not saying nothing. Because they basically talked about what happens to Dad. But we don't know exactly what happens to him yet. All we know is that one time where his former self was laying down naked and shot. She reassures Amber that we're always going to have Daddy forever, but she don't believe that shit. And she's pretty much scared for him at this point. While they're playing, we hear a collapse in the kitchen. His leg is messed up, he's got hypothermia, so she calls the hospital. I'm pretty sure it was a time where he teleported and she's just spazzing the fuck out at this point. We're not sure what happened to him, but bottom line is he's going to be in a wheelchair for a while. And they're even more scared now considering the last time they saw him, he was laying on the ground shot. So Alba says when she doesn't want to teleport, she starts singing to herself. Which sounds nice, but obviously it didn't work for Henry. Yeah, he disappeared again. We see him lying in the snow. He gets up, he's in the back of his house watching himself go through hypothermia. Then he disappears again. Back in real time, they're having Christmas dinner. They got the turkey out, talking about wrapping up presents and stuff. Then afterwards, he invites everybody over for a get-together. He has a heart-to-heart when Mark says he loves him. Claire comes out to meet him. He's got this sad look on his face, and she's scared to death at this point. And that's when she realizes this is the day where he's supposed to die. It feels like a last kiss goodbye. Then all of a sudden, he wakes up in the meadows again. Snow on the ground and everything. When he wakes up, he's staring face to face with a buck. What we don't see here are there are actual hunters in the distance. You see where I'm about to go with the hunting thing? As the buck is running off, Henry turns around and gets shot. But when they go to check to see if they got the deer, there's nothing but a blood patch as Henry's gone. And the person that shot him just happened to be Claire's dad. Damn. And that's when he appeared back in the house laying on the ground naked. Which what we thought was hypothermia, but it turns out that was the actual gunshot wound. Yeah, that scene where he was watching himself through the window. And yes, Henry officially ended up dying right there. Done deal dead. Then we see a scene where Alba and Claire are on the bed. Notice how she's clutching onto her, right? Then we have a shot of Alba playing in the meadows. And what the fuck? Henry pops up out of the meadows. How is he able to do time travel if he's dead? Time travel, my bad. And while that's going down, Claire's racing down to meet him too. Now, how the hell did Claire do time travel? Because she clutched onto Alba when she was asleep? Well, anyway, she has a few more moments with him, and then he disappears for good. Alba gets his clothes, folds it all nice and neat, and they walk off into the sunset. Yeah. But you might as well just leave his clothes there, you know what I'm saying? If he's dead, he can still time travel, you know what I mean? How does that even work? How does any of it work? The Time Traveler's Wife on Netflix. Check it out, like, subscribe, do all that. You already know what time it is. Sleep easy, out the easy, mister. Big, you got that slogan.